Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. In today's video, we're going to briefly analyze Arsenal's first half right side dominance that played a key factor in their 2-0 win over Spurs. So in today's video, first we're going to focus on Tottenham's shape, then we'll shift to Arsenal's pressing, and lastly we'll focus on how Saka and that right side played a key role in Arsenal's success. So when we break it all down and we do look at the board, we have Arsenal in a 4-3-3 and Spurs in a 3-4-2-1 that shifted into a 5-4-1 out of possession. What we ended up seeing in the early stages is that Spurs didn't look to press high from the front and they were comfortable in dropping off into that 5-4-1. And what we've seen from Arsenal this season is that they have swapped into multiple shapes in terms of their overall attacking buildup. They've commonly shifted to a 3-2-5, and that does see Zinchenko or White pushing forward, or simply Zinchenko tucking in towards that midfield zone, Saka and Odegaard pushing beyond the midfielders to occupy the center backs, and then you still get the width from Saka and Martinelli. The other alternative would be for Arsenal to play in a 4-1-5, and there you have the fullbacks just a bit narrow. You still get the width from the wide attacking players, and Saka and Odegaard are still moving into those pockets of space between the lines to get on the ball. We often saw Arsenal in more of a 3-2-5 when they looked to attack from the left-hand side, and you'd see Saka pushing beyond Sarr to occupy Romero, and then Zinchenko was just ahead of Kulusevski and Sarr, and Martinelli was being occupied by the wingback. Arsenal didn't have much of a threat down that left-hand side, and that's due to the fact that they did have protection for their wingback, and at times Romero did shift across to provide cover if need be. So therefore, when you do analyze their overall shape, the fact they do have 5 defenders would come in handy because they can ensure that they occupy Martinelli, Xhaka, and Nketiah, Odegaard, and Saka, and then they could have Sarr and Højbjerg just in that central area protecting that space. The problem that they ended up encountering was that when they did drop off into this narrow shape, one was that Thomas Partey wasn't being picked up in that zone, and normally in this shape you'd have Kane dropping off a bit deeper to ensure that he does pick up Thomas Partey and thus allowing the center backs to get on the ball. Essentially, if Xhaka and Odegaard didn't push higher up the pitch to occupy the center backs, then Sarr and Højbjerg would be tasked with closing them down. But the other alternative here was that if Xhaka did push a bit high and Romero had to step towards him, then you could simply have Sarr pushing forward to close down Thomas Partey, or Højbjerg looking to close down Thomas Partey if Odegaard was pushing towards Lenglet. However, the problem that Arsenal exploited in that regard was that even if Xhaka was pushing forward to occupy Romero, Odegaard would often drop off into that pocket of space on the outside of Højbjerg, and with Son closing down White or Saliba, there was a large gap of space that Thomas Partey could often drag away one of those midfielders and then play a pass in towards Odegaard, who can then push forward. And then there were simply situations where you simply had Thomas Partey not being closed down by Kane or one of the midfielders because Odegaard would be occupying Højbjerg or Sarr depending on who was on that side, and then looking to sprint forward in towards the Dyer Lenglet gap. That would give Thomas Partey time on the ball, and he would often look to shift the ball out towards White if he was able to run beyond Son caught higher up the pitch, or simply play the ball out towards Saka to get into 1v1s against Sessegnon. Odegaard was often always an open outlet because when he dropped off in towards that pocket of space, the only player that could pick him up would be Lenglet if he pushed out in towards that midfield zone or in towards the Arsenal half. And even in those situations, you witnessed times where Odegaard was able to shake him off, bypass him, and then help progress the Arsenal attack. But Spurs is reluctant to press, and their overall shape did cause them issues, and we did witness that in the build-up to both goals. In the opening goal, you could see that Thomas Partey is unmarked, and when you see Kane stepping towards Saliba, Saliba drags him out and simply plays the ball into the path of Thomas Partey. From there, you could see that no one steps forward to pick him up, and that allows him to play a long ball over the top for Saka, making the run beyond Sessegnon. And then in the build-up to the second goal, yes, Arsenal do get lucky because Saliba does win a ball that Kane and Son commit to, but you see Thomas Partey dragging Højbjerg towards him, and from there you have Sessegnon caught higher up the pitch, and you witness both midfielders attracted towards the ball, and Thomas Partey simply slides the ball beyond all 3 players into the path of Saka with space to run into, and that progresses the attack. Whereas when you focus on Arsenal, you could see the clear contrast in terms of their efficiency and organization with their pressing, and when they dropped off into 2 banks of 4 in their own half. They looked to close the 3 center backs with their attacking wide players. They had Martinelli and Saka stepping towards Lenglet and Romero, and Nketiah sitting on Dyer. if they were bypassed, you'd have Zinchenko and White closing down the wing backs. You'd have Xhaka and Odegaard stepping towards Højbjerg and Sarr. And then from there, it would be 3v3 with Thomas Partey picking up the closest attacking player near him. You'd have Saliba and Gabriel taking turns dealing with Kane. And then they would stick towards the free man because there were situations, for instance, where White was caught closing down Sessegnon, and you would see Saliba stepping towards Son, or there were even times where you witnessed Saliba and Gabriel pushing in towards their own half to close down Kane. There were scenarios where you witnessed Odegaard stepping towards Longley, and then Nketiah would drop off on Dyer, and from there you'd witness Saka stepping towards Sessegnon higher up the pitch, and Thomas Partey would be tasked dealing with Højbjerg. From there, that would leave Son free, and that's where you would see Ben White at times pushing across to close down Son's movement. And then the same thing could be applicable on the opposite flank. For instance, if you have Martinelli stepping towards Romero and Zinchenko has to push forward towards the wing back, if Xhaka's closing down Højbjerg because Thomas Partey is stuck in a central position, then that's where you would see Gabriel at times pushing forward to deal with Kulusevski, and then Saliba would be tasked with closing down Kane. Frankly, the only time that Arsenal's pressing went astray in that opening half was if Kane or Son dropped off deeper and the center backs didn't get tight on them, or they were able to evade the pressure from those center backs. And it was largely down that left-hand side where Sessegnon was making runs off Saka, and from there they were able to switch the ball out towards him. But there were two situations in particular where Sessegnon did get beyond Saka, and in those situations, when he got in towards the final third, his first cross was blocked by Thomas Partey, and then the second one against White was a poor delivery in towards the penalty area. However, he was involved in Spurs' best chance, and that stemmed through a long ball where Sessegnon did run across Saka to get the long ball from Dyer, and in that situation he was able to hold off the Arsenal defense, locate the run of Son in beyond the Arsenal backline and towards the penalty area, and he slid a nice reverse ball beyond the Arsenal backline to place Son in a legitimate goal scoring position in right half space, but Ramsdale denied Son. Then there were times where Arsenal simply dropped off into two banks of four, and from there what you'd end up seeing was that they would have Nketiah and Odegaard initially just in between Sarr and Højbjerg. They'd have Martinelli and Saka tucking in narrow, but with Kulusevski and Son occupying White and Zinchenko, that would leave the two center backs with Kane, and if the wing backs push forward, Martinelli and Saka would track back to close them down. This is where you often did see Longley looking to push forward and carry the ball in towards the Arsenal half, and from there Odegaard would look to close him down but block off the passing lane in towards Højbjerg, or they'd simply have Nketiah shift across to close him down and force Spurs to recycle the ball to the opposite flank. In these situations, if Son or Kulusevski looked to drop off into pockets of space, Xhaka and Thomas Partey could pick them up, or they could simply have Zinchenko and White pressing them hard from behind to close them down to ensure that they can't turn with the ball. That essentially forced Son and Kulusevski to receive the ball ahead of the Arsenal midfield bank, ahead of the gap between the wide player and the central midfielder, which therefore limited their overall impact in the Arsenal third. And then the same thing was applicable down the left-hand side. If Romero looked to push forward, Nketiah would step towards him and block off the passing lane in towards Sarr. But even in the situation that we witnessed, you had Xhaka pushing forward to close down Sarr, and you could see Thomas Partey tracking the movement of Højbjerg. Spurs did look to combat that by having Højbjerg dropping towards the halfway line in an inside left position, but even then you would see Odegaard pushing forward to close him down, allow the center backs on the ball, and then you could have Thomas Partey and Xhaka dealing with either Kane, Son, or Kulusevski if they dropped off deeper, and that would allow the center backs to hold their position. So when we shift back to Spurs' 5-4-1, like we stated, Thomas Partey did have a lot of time on the ball to find Odegaard in pockets of space, who could then progress the play out to Saka and White, or he would simply play the ball in towards White and Saka if they could bypass Son, who was caught higher up the pitch. Now, this isn't to say that Thomas Partey was perfect in that zone, as there were situations where he did give away the ball in dangerous positions. And Arsenal's impact down that right-hand side wasn't successful from the get-go. Initially, they were looking to get the ball in towards Saka to run at Sessegnon, and that was clear. But they were having White making overlapping runs beyond him because Son was caught higher up the pitch. And Saka was looking to play the ball in towards White, and rather than having Longley shift across, it was Sessegnon who was dropping back deeper, and White failed to have an impact when he received the ball in those zones. The same thing could be said towards Saka, as he struggled to to get the ball on towards his left foot to serve as a goal scoring threat, but his impact stemmed through him making runs in behind Sessegnon, as you witnessed with the opening goal. But what you also witnessed was that because Spurs wanted to ensure that Saka couldn't get the ball on towards his left foot, initially Sessegnon was showing Saka towards the byline, and from there he had enough space to get the ball on towards his right foot, and he was able to impact the game from that zone. In the build-up to Thomas Partey hitting the post, it was Thomas Partey sliding the ball across Sessegnon, forced Saka to receive the ball in a 1v1, and from there he drags Longley and Son towards him, and Sessegnon shows him towards the byline, and that's where he drags the ball towards that zone, and with his right foot he locates Martinelli unmarked at the back post, and he places him in this position where he awkwardly has to guide the ball towards the 6-yard area, and it places Nketiah in this position where he nods the ball upwards, and that results in the clearance that Thomas Partey rattled off the post. And then similar to Arsenal's win at the Emirates against Spurs, his impact resulted in him dragging Longley and Son towards the ball, creating a 1v3, but this would allow him to play the ball back in towards Odegaard, and a simple pullback towards the Arsenal captain was enough space for Odegaard to impact the game ahead of the penalty area. Because as you could see in the build-up to Arsenal's second goal that killed off the game, it was Saka running beyond Sarr and Sessegnon at Longley, squaring the ball towards Odegaard, and once again in a pocket of space, he was able to get the ball on towards his left foot and from this position beat Lloris. So as you can see, although we did witness an improved performance from Spurs in the second half, it was Arsenal's dominance in the opening 45 minutes that ultimately decided the game and frankly could have resulted in a North London derby blowout.